The plastic lunchbox hit the bottom of the trash can with a hollow thud, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the quiet courtyard. For a few seconds, the world seemed to freeze. My daughter just stood there, eyes wide, her little hands still resting on her lap, where her meal had been seconds ago. Her sandwich, carefully cut into triangles the way she liked it. Her yogurt, her apple slices, her favorite pink spoon, all gone. In one swift, thoughtless motion, Karen had snatched the lunchbox from the bench and dumped it into the trash, like it was infected with filth. My daughter blinked rapidly, her mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Her bottom lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Not until Karen turned and looked at her. Not with compassion, not even with annoyance, but with a look that could only be described as disgust. "She shouldn't be sitting out here," Karen snapped, brushing invisible lint from her beige sweater. "This isn't a shelter." The words cut through the air like glass. Harsh. Final. There was no one else in the courtyard, just my little girl with her therapy pillow and blanket sitting in her usual shady spot under the magnolia tree. It's where she felt safe, where the sounds didn't overwhelm her, where she could eat without the buzz of fluorescent lights and the echo of a loud cafeteria that always made her anxious. It wasn't just a picnic spot to her, it was a lifeline. My daughter opened her mouth to speak, maybe to protest or ask why, but Karen was already turning her back, already walking away, muttering about aesthetic violations and unauthorized use of common areas. My daughter looked at the trash can, then at the empty space where her food used to be, then down at her lap again, as if hoping the lunch would magically reappear. She reached slowly for her comfort toy, the small butterfly charm she always carried, and clenched it in her palm, her throat tight, her stomach now not just hungry, but twisted with shame. And that's when the tears started. Not loud sobs, not wails, just silent tears slipping down her cheeks while she stared at the crumpled foil poking out of the trash bin. A teacher's aide walked by, but didn't stop. A groundskeeper glanced over and looked away. No one said anything. No one did anything. They had seen Karen's wrath before, and no one wanted to get involved. I wasn't there, but I would hear every detail later from my daughter, her voice trembling as she asked me if she wasn't allowed to eat outside because of her disability face. That's what she called it, disability face. Because that's what Karen had once muttered when she thought no one was listening. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about a sandwich. This was about humiliation, power, control. And I couldn't stop asking myself, when did eating outside become a crime for a disabled child? Her name is Ella, 7 years old, with soft curls the color of autumn leaves and eyes that seem to hold the sky in them. She's the kind of child who says "excuse me" to butterflies and thanks the wind when it cools her face. She was born with a sensory processing disorder and high-functioning autism, which means the world often feels too loud, too bright, too fast. Sounds that most people tune out. A buzzing light, a distant bell, the scrape of a chair can make her flinch. Her body sometimes freezes when overwhelmed, and she doesn't always have the words to explain why. But what she lacks in volume, she makes up for in heart. She's gentle, curious, and kind in ways that humble even the adults around her. She sees magic in ants and hears music in the rustle of leaves. And more than anything else, she loves eating outside. There's something about the air, the open space, the sun dappling through the trees that soothes her. She says the wind helps her ears feel calmer, that the birds talk softer than people do. Indoors, the cafeteria is a battlefield, chaotic, crowded, overstimulating. The flicker of overhead lights hurts her eyes. The metallic bang of lunch trays makes her cover her ears. When she was younger, she'd scream or throw up just from the noise. After a long, tear-filled process of meetings, assessments, and evaluations, her doctors and school therapists agreed. Ella should be allowed to eat in a quiet place outside when weather permits. It wasn't a special privilege, it was a form of survival. Her lunch was carefully packed each day, allergy-friendly, balanced, with textures she could tolerate. I always included a note, a butterfly sticker, and her pink cloth napkin. That outdoor bench under the magnolia tree became her safe haven, her picnic spot, her tiny sanctuary. When we moved to Willow Bend, the HOA community that promised peaceful family-focused living, I genuinely believed we'd found a place to breathe. The brochures were covered in smiling children and pristine sidewalks. They touted safety, friendly neighbors, clean parks, and shared values. After years of apartment living and being surrounded by noise and traffic, it felt like a dream. I envisioned Ella making friends, drawing chalk butterflies on the driveway, eating her lunch beneath our tree-lined street without judgment or stares. For a while it worked. She liked the flowers. She liked the squirrels. She liked the idea of living in a storybook neighborhood. But even storybooks have villains. The first time Karen saw Ella sitting outside during lunch, she stared for a long time. No greeting, no smile, just a pursed lip expression like someone had left a stain on her favorite blouse. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was confused. Maybe she didn't understand. But then came the comments. Subtle, dismissive. Shouldn't she be inside with the rest of the children? Or isn't it a hygiene risk to eat on public benches? I explained kindly every time. I mentioned Ella's condition, the doctor's orders, the school's approval. Karen always nodded slowly, then walked away without a word. She never used Ella's name. Just that girl, or worse, the one with the needs. Over time, her comments grew bolder. She once said, "It sends the wrong message, letting her be out here alone like that. Makes people uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. That was Karen's favorite word. It didn't matter that Ella was happy, regulated, and safe. It didn't matter that her being outside was a medical necessity. What mattered to Karen was image, order, appearances. Ella disrupted her sense of normal. And while Ella never complained, never once, she noticed. She noticed when Karen passed by and didn't wave. She noticed when her lunch spot was suddenly covered in fresh mulch. She noticed the grown-ups whispering when they thought she wasn't listening. She asked me once, "Is it okay that I eat outside, or does it make people sad?" I told her the truth. It's not your job to make other people comfortable. It's your job to be safe, to be you. But I didn't know then that one day, that very picnic spot, the one place where Ella felt calm and whole, would become the stage for one of the most humiliating moments of her little life. The Willow Bend Homeowners Association wasn't just a governing body, it was a belief system. It operated like a suburban temple built to worship visual perfection. Every lawn had to be mowed precisely to 2 inches. Flower beds were to contain only HOA-approved plants. No wildflowers, no unruly colors. Trash cans couldn't be placed outside more than 30 minutes before pickup. Children's chalk art? Technically discouraged. Plastic Halloween decorations? Fine. At first, it seemed quirky, even amusing. We thought, they care about the neighborhood looking nice. But we soon learned that nice meant something far more rigid. It meant identical, predictable, undisturbed. Anything or anyone that disrupted that image was treated like a blemish on glass. The HOA didn't yell or threaten. It didn't have to. It spoke through passive-aggressive notices, fines for obscure violations, and board meetings filled with phrases like community consistency and aesthetic value. It functioned like a suburban surveillance system, fueled by whispers and reports from the self-appointed guardians of the rules. And at the center of it all was Karen. Karen was the board secretary, but she carried herself like the HOA president, sheriff, and judge rolled into one. In her 50s, she wore pastel cardigans, always smelled faintly of lavender and bleach, and seemed to glide instead of walk. She smiled at you, but her eyes were constantly scanning for rule breakers, for weeds and flower beds, for children's toys left on porches. She had a clipboard nearly glued to her hand, filled with blank violation forms and notes scribbled in looping, decisive cursive. She wasn't outright rude. No, Karen's weapon was polite enforcement. She called it community leadership. We called it intimidation. She made her rounds every morning and evening. She never knocked. She just looked, took photos, jotted things down. We received our first HOA warning within a week of moving in. a notice that Ella's wheelchair ramp was not appropriately camouflaged. Camouflaged? It was a sleek aluminum ramp designed for safe access, not a military bunker. But the letter suggested we blend it with planter boxes or remove it entirely if no longer needed. Then came the garden flag. It was small, cheerful, just a cloth butterfly with the words, "Different is beautiful." Ella had picked it out herself. We stuck it in the front flower bed by the driveway. Within 48 hours, we received another violation. Unapproved signage. Remove immediately. When I called to explain, Karen answered with a calm, clipped tone. "We support all families here," she said, "but signs and messages, even if well-intentioned, can invite conflict. We aim for neutrality." As if inclusion was a provocation. As if my daughter's identity was a political statement. Karen never once said Ella's name. She referred to her as your child or the one with the accommodations. She once told me, smiling of course, that it must be exhausting for you, keeping up appearances. I wasn't sure if she meant the home or my child. Maybe both. And when I mentioned Ella's needs, her love for being outside, and her sensory challenges, Karen gave me that same expressionless nod. Yes, well, we all have our challenges. But we must think about the greater community. Over time, it became clear Karen didn't hate Ella. That would have required too much passion. No, Karen dismissed her. She didn't see her as a child or a person. She saw her as a disruption, a deviation from the neat, manicured image she worked so hard to preserve. To Karen, Ella's presence on a bench with a lunchbox was just as offensive as a broken sprinkler or an unsanctioned patio umbrella. And the worst part? Most of the neighborhood let her get away with it, because silence in Willow Bend was easier than resistance. Most days, lunchtime was Ella's moment of peace, a single, quiet stretch in the chaos of a school day where she could just be. While the other children jostled and chattered in the echoing cafeteria, Ella preferred the patch of grass near the playground, under a tall oak tree whose shade swayed like slow lullabies. She would spread out her small butterfly blanket, place her lunch on her lap, and hum softly to herself as she ate. Her meals were simple, foods that didn't overwhelm her senses. She couldn't tolerate strong smells or strange textures. No mashed foods, no sauces that mixed. Everything had to be separated, predictable. I packed her lunch with care, triangular sandwiches, peeled apples, her favorite vegan yogurt with the little pink spoon. Her occupational therapist had recommended outdoor lunch after noticing how overstimulated she became indoors. The cafeteria was a war zone of noise for her, trays slamming, chairs scraping, kids shouting across tables. She'd return from it trembling, sometimes in tears, sometimes unable to speak for the rest of the day. After a full review with the school's support team and her doctor's recommendation, we had secured permission for Ella to eat outside. It was official, on file, and approved. Every day, she was escorted by a gentle aide who sat nearby, not hovering, just watching to ensure she was safe. Ella began to thrive. She looked forward to lunch. She started eating more, smiling more. Sometimes, she even invited classmates to sit with her. Most declined, but she didn't seem to mind. "Butterflies eat alone," she once said. "That's how they learn to fly." Then came the day Karen saw her. It must have been a PDA visit or one of those days where she lurked nearby to check on grounds maintenance or parent visibility. Whatever the reason, Karen happened to pass the side of the school where Ella sat peacefully on her blanket, taking small bites of her sandwich and whispering a story to her butterfly charm. Karen paused. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything, at least not to Ella. But the aide noticed. Karen hovered at a distance for a few minutes, arms crossed, lips tight. Then she walked off. The next day, Karen appeared again. This time, she didn't hover. She approached. "Excuse me," she said curtly to the aide. "Is this an approved area for lunch?" The aide explained gently, kindly that yes, it was cleared by administration and doctors alike. Karen's response was a polite scoff. "Well, we can't have just anyone sitting wherever they like. It sends a wrong message." The aide reminded her it was for medical reasons. Karen forced a smile. Oh, I see. Special treatment. She left, but after that, she kept showing up. Not every day, but often enough to make her presence felt. She'd pace nearby, eyeing Ella like she was waiting for her to make a mistake. Once she took photos. Another time, she said, loud enough to be heard, some parents think their kids are too good for the rules. Ella didn't understand, not fully, but she noticed the tension. She began packing up her lunch earlier. She started eating faster. One day, she asked if she could eat in the nurse's office instead. Why? I asked. She looked down. I think I make the grass look messy. And that's when I knew. Karen wasn't just hovering. She was circling, waiting, watching. And whatever she was planning next, it was only a matter of time. It was a Thursday, bright, breezy, and warm, the kind of day Ella loved most. She had woken up humming, her tiny fingers dancing across the windowsill as she watched butterflies flit in the yard. She wore her favorite yellow shirt with the sequined sunflower on the chest, the one she called her sunshine armor. I packed her lunch just the way she liked. Turkey sandwich with the crusts cut off, peeled apple slices dusted lightly with cinnamon, and her favorite dairy-free vanilla yogurt. I even included a handwritten note. You're brave. You're beautiful. You are not a bother. It was something I had to remind her more often lately. Something she had started to question in whispers. That day, she sat in her usual spot, beneath the old oak tree, blanket spread neatly, lunch placed with quiet care in front of her. Her aide had stepped away for a brief moment to check in with another student, but everything was calm. Ella was halfway through her sandwich, softly singing the song I always sang while brushing her hair, when the sound of sharp footsteps broke her rhythm. She looked up and saw Karen approaching. Her heart didn't jump. She didn't feel fear. Not yet. She smiled. Karen didn't. Hi, Ella said softly, her voice gentle like her hands. Karen looked down at her without expression, her eyes scanning the blanket, the lunchbox, the folded napkin with cartoon bears on it. Her mouth twisted, like she had tasted something sour. This isn't a dining area, she said coldly. Ella blinked. It's my lunch spot. Karen folded her arms. You people think rules don't apply, don't you? Ella didn't understand what that meant. You people. But she felt the chill in the words. Her smile faded a little. She glanced around for her aide, but the hallway was empty. The sun didn't feel so warm anymore. Karen stepped closer. Children aren't supposed to eat here. It makes the school look disorganized. There's a cafeteria for a reason. Ella's small hands clutched her spoon. But I get to eat here, she said softly, because the noise inside makes me hurt. Karen's eyes narrowed. That's not my problem. And then, before Ella could move, before she could react, or even process, Karen reached down, snatched the lunchbox from in front of her, and walked swiftly toward the nearby trash can. No! Ella gasped, standing up too fast and nearly losing her balance. Karen didn't stop. She didn't look back. She opened the lid, held the lunchbox above it, and without a pause, dropped it in. It landed with a dull, sickening thump. The sandwich crushed, the yogurt splattered, the spoon lost somewhere in the mess of discarded wrappers and forgotten snacks. Ella froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the trash can, then at Karen, who was already walking away like nothing had happened. No apology, no explanation, just a muttered comment thrown over her shoulder. If she wants to eat like a stray, maybe she should expect to be treated like one. Ella's eyes welled up. She didn't scream. She didn't cry loudly. She just stood there, her breath catching in short, broken gasps as her legs began to tremble. She slowly sank back onto the blanket, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest as if trying to make herself disappear. Her lunch, her safe food, her happy place was gone, violated, and for reasons she couldn't fully understand. When the aide returned, Ella didn't speak. She just pointed to the trash can, then turned away. Later that night after her bath, she whispered the question that shattered me. Is it because I'm broken? I wrapped her in my arms and tried to speak, but my throat refused. Because I had no words big enough to explain how a grown woman could throw away a child's lunch. Not out of concern, not out of confusion, but out of cruelty, out of disdain. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. This wasn't going to end with silence. It was going to end with truth and justice. Ella didn't tell me right away. That evening, she was quieter than usual, pushing her dinner around on her plate instead of eating it. She didn't hum. She didn't tell me about the clouds or what birds she saw during recess. She just stared down, her lips pressed tight, her eyes rimmed red like she'd been holding back tears all day. I asked if something had happened at school. She shook her head. It was just a day, she said, but I know my daughter. And silence, for her, was a scream she didn't know how to let out. It wasn't until bedtime, when I was tucking her in, that the dam finally cracked. Her little voice broke in the dark, barely above a whisper. "Mommy, am I in trouble?" I sat up straight. Of course not. Why would you think that? Because she hesitated, clutching her blanket tight. Karen threw my lunch away. I blinked, unsure I'd heard correctly. "What do you mean, baby?" She said I can't eat outside. She took my lunch and threw it in the trash. She paused. I didn't know I wasn't allowed. "I'm sorry. I really try to be good." I stared at her, stunned. A grown woman, someone in a position of supposed authority, had taken my disabled daughter's lunch and humiliated her in public, and no one thought to call me? No one intervened? I held her tightly, her small frame trembling against mine. My heart was pounding. The disbelief dissolved quickly, replaced by a slow, burning rage. I didn't care how strict this community was. There was no interpretation of rules that justified cruelty like that. The next morning, I went straight to the school office, demanding answers. The receptionist looked flustered. The principal wasn't available. Eventually, an assistant administrator came out to meet me in the hallway, offering the same tired phrases I'd heard too many times before. "We're still gathering information. This might be a misunderstanding. Let's not make assumptions before reviewing the situation." But I wasn't assuming. I was listening to my daughter. When I asked why Karen, a non-staff, non-licensed HOA board member, was even permitted to roam campus during school hours, the administrator vaguely mentioned something about community engagement and a partnership with the HOA for campus beautification and security. I nearly laughed. Since when did that include policing where a disabled child eats? Next, I went to the HOA office. Karen, of course, wasn't there. But I was greeted by a smug board member who spoke to me like I was interrupting their spa appointment. She was enforcing community guidelines, they said flatly. Lunch is not permitted in common areas that aren't designated eating zones. Exceptions can be unsafe, unsanitary, and visually disruptive. Visually disruptive, as if my daughter's blanket and lunchbox offended someone's landscaping. I walked out shaking, not with fear, but fury, because it wasn't just about Ella's lunch. It was about the message they sent, "You don't belong," and I was going to make damn sure they regretted ever sending it. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my fists clenched, mind spinning with every cruel detail. The image of Ella watching her lunch hit the bottom of the trash can played over and over again in my head. I kept hearing her tiny voice asking if she was in trouble. And every time I thought I had calmed down, I remembered Karen's words. She shouldn't be sitting outside. Like my daughter was a stray, a blemish, something to be hidden. The next morning, I wasn't tired. I was electric with purpose. I started by demanding a formal meeting with the school's administration. I came armed with documentation: Ella's diagnosis, her therapist's recommendations, the official IEP form permitting her to eat outside. They shuffled paper, exchanged glances, and tried to stay neutral. But I didn't let them off the hook. A volunteer threw my daughter's lunch in the garbage. I said clearly, "She shamed a disabled child. I want her removed. I want it documented. And I want a public apology." They said they would look into it. I didn't wait around. I began reaching out to other parents in the district, especially those in support groups for children with disabilities. I asked one question: Has your child ever been discouraged from eating outside or in a quiet place? The messages started trickling in, then flooding. One mother told me her autistic son was told to sit at the back of the cafeteria because he hummed while eating and bothered the other students. Another said her daughter, who had sensory integration issues, had her lunch moved to a staff supply room, where she had to eat alone near a mop bucket. A grandmother said her grandson, who used a walker, was asked to stay indoors during lunch because outdoor eating made supervision harder. Every story was like a cut across my skin. Ella wasn't the only one. We weren't dealing with a misunderstanding. We were dealing with a pattern. Meanwhile, I started researching the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. And the more I read, the angrier I became. The school's inaction wasn't just cold, it was illegal. Denying a child reasonable accommodations, allowing a non-staff person to interfere with a child's care, failing to prevent harassment, these were violations. I contacted a local disability rights attorney who confirmed it. If Ella had medical documentation permitting outdoor lunch and that accommodation was interfered with by a third party under the school's authority, we had a case. But the real confirmation came unexpectedly. I received an anonymous email from a school staff member. No name, no subject, just a few lines. I saw what happened to your daughter. It wasn't the first time. Karen has made comments before. She doesn't like seeing kids with disabilities outside. She said it makes people uncomfortable. Some staff agree with her quietly. Please don't stop. You're not wrong. I stared at the screen for minutes, my hands shaking. Rage, grief, and vindication churned together in my chest. This wasn't just about Karen. It was about a mindset, a deep rot that ran beneath the surface of community standards, a belief that difference equals disruption, that disability should be tucked away behind walls where no one has to see it. But I wasn't going to let them hide anymore. I printed out every email, every policy, every report. I started speaking at school board meetings. I shared Ella's story publicly, without names at first, just the facts. A child, a disability, a lunch thrown away, and the silence that followed. But the silence didn't last. Parents started showing up beside me. Advocates from disability rights groups offered support. Local media caught wind of the growing unrest. And when I was finally ready, I named names. I filed a formal complaint against Karen with both the school district and the HOA. I sent letters to the superintendent, the Office for Civil Rights, and the ADA Compliance Board. I let them know I wasn't going away, and neither was Ella. What they did to her was more than just an act of cruelty, it was a denial of her humanity. A message that she didn't deserve the same dignity, the same lunch, the same air. But they picked the wrong family to silence. And I wasn't just fighting for Ella anymore. I was fighting for every child who had been told in ways loud or quiet, "You don't belong here." I never imagined it would go viral. I had written the post late one night after staring at Ella's empty lunchbox for far too long. I didn't name Karen. I didn't call for outrage. I just told the truth. I told them what happened, that my disabled daughter's lunch was taken by a neighborhood HOA board member and thrown into the trash because she was eating outside because her disability made her different. I wrote about the shame in Ella's voice, about the way she looked at me and asked if she was broken, about how no one stood up for her, not the staff, not the system. I ended the post with a simple question: is this what community looks like? By morning, it had over 10,000 shares. By the end of the week, over 1 million people had seen it. Hashtags like hashtag let them eat, hashtag lunchboxjustice, and hashtag butterflybrave began trending. Parents of disabled children across the country commented with their own stories, nearly identical in heartbreak. Teachers apologized for not speaking up. Dietitians explained how food shaming damages children's relationships with their bodies. Occupational therapists posted videos about the necessity of sensory accommodations in schools. Even influencers, some with millions of followers, began amplifying Ella's story, calling out the cruelty of aesthetic policing disguised as policy. It wasn't just a lunch anymore. It was a movement. A local news station requested an interview. I hesitated at first, but When I asked Ella, she said yes. As long as they didn't show her face, she wanted people to hear her voice. They blurred her identity, softened the lighting, and let her speak. I just wanted to eat outside because it made my ears feel better, she said. But she took my food, and it made me feel like I was bad. Her voice was calm, clear, braver than I could ever be. The news clip aired that evening, and then another station picked it up, then national outlets. Public pressure grew fast and heavy. The school district released a statement filled with the usual word salad. We value all students. We are committed to reviewing volunteer policies. We take these concerns seriously. But it wasn't enough. Parents in the community began organizing. Some demanded Karen's resignation. Others called for a full ADA audit of the school and HOA. Emails flooded the district. The story refused to die down. Then, one quiet morning, the HOA updated their website. Karen had voluntarily stepped down from her board duties due to health reasons. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing. Just a quiet retreat behind a vague excuse. And just like that, the woman who once threw away a child's lunch to protect community standards was no longer in charge of enforcing them. But the damage was already done. And this time, people were watching. The changes came quietly, but they came. A few weeks after news died down, the school installed a new outdoor eating area, a shaded, sensory-friendly space with soft mats, adjustable benches, and a calming mural of butterflies and trees. They didn't make a big announcement. No ribbon cutting, no press. Just action. Real, thoughtful change. A plaque read, "For the students who need space to feel safe." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A beginning. Ella was the first to use it. She sat on one of the butterfly mats with her new lunchbox, purple this time with glitter stars, and slowly began inviting others to join her. First, it was a quiet boy who wore noise-canceling headphones, then a girl with a speech delay who loved painting clouds. Soon, there were 4 or 5 children sharing snacks, stories, and silence under the soft hum of wind chimes. Ella called them her butterfly lunch picnics. It became a place where difference didn't need to be explained, it was simply accepted. And she changed, too. She started raising her hand more in class. She told her teacher when she needed a break instead of shutting down. She smiled more, laughed louder. One day, she came home and said, "I'm not scared of being seen anymore." I couldn't help but cry. At the next City Inclusion Forum, I was invited to speak. I stood before a crowd of educators, board members, parents, people who had once looked through us, and told our story. I spoke about the power of visibility, about the harm caused by quiet cruelty, about the difference between enforcing rules and weaponizing them. And I told them what my daughter had taught me, that belonging isn't a luxury. It's a right, and no child should ever have to earn it. After the event, several schools reached out asking how to replicate what ours had done. I sent them our IEP template, the sensory guidelines, and the mural design Ella had helped sketch. Her butterflies were spreading. As for Karen, she vanished from community life. No more patrols, no more clipboards, no more cold stares during school pickup. She didn't show her face at meetings, and eventually her house went up for sale. Some said she moved out of embarrassment. Others said she filed a complaint of her own, claiming the stress damaged her health. I never heard from her again. But honestly, I didn't need to, because her absence was its own apology. In the space where her control once loomed, there was now light. Space for children like Ella to breathe, eat, exist without fear, without shame, without judgment. And every morning now, as I pack Ella's lunch, I add the same note I always did. But this time, when she reads it, she believes it. You're brave. You're beautiful. You are not a bother. Just when life began to feel normal again, when Ella's laughter returned, when our mornings were free from fear, I got another letter in the mail. Certified. Legal. This time, it wasn't from the school or the HOA. It was from Karen. She was suing us. The letter claimed that my post, the news coverage, and the public backlash had caused her irreparable emotional distress and permanent damage to her reputation. She wanted money, a retraction, silence. She accused me of manipulating the public, of exploiting my daughter's condition for attention. She called herself the real victim. I stared at the letter, trembling not with fear, but with disbelief. After everything she did, she still believed she was the one who had suffered most. But what she didn't know was, I was just getting started. Backhand index pointing right in the next episode. Karen takes it to court, and what happens inside the courtroom will leave the world speechless.